Thoughts or prayers? So now I want y'all to remind me of that in a minute or two. There was a farmer who was named Clyde, and he had a car accident. And the trucking company's fancy lawyer was questioning Clyde, and the lawyer said, "Didn't you say at the scene of the accident, 'I'm fine'?" And Clyde responded, "Well, I'll tell you what happened. I just loaded my favorite mule, Bessie, into the..." I didn't ask for any details, the lawyer interrupted. "Just answer the question. Didn't you say at the scene of the accident that you were fine?" And Clyde said, "Well, I just got Bessie into the trailer and I was driving down the road." And the lawyer interrupted again and said, "Judge, I'm trying to establish the fact that at the scene of the accident, this man told the highway patrolman, the patrolman that was there at that time, he told him he was just fine. And now, several weeks after the accident, he's trying to sue my client. I believe he's a fraud. Please simply answer the question." Now, by this time, the judge was fairly amused, and he was fairly interested to see what Clyde's answer would be. And so he said to the attorney, "I'd like to say about Bessie." And Clyde thanked the judge, and he proceeded. He said, "Well, as I was saying, I just loaded Bessie, my favorite mule, into the trailer and was driving her down the highway when this huge semi-truck ran the stop sign and smacked my truck right in the side. I was into one ditch and Bessie into the other. I was hurting really bad and I didn't want to move. However, I could hear old Bessie moaning and groaning. I knew she was in by her moans. And shortly after the accident, the highway patrolman came on the scene. And you know, he had to shoot old Bessie. And then he came over and asked me how I was doing. Wouldn't you say just fine? Okay, now back to our topic, our thoughts or prayers. What a perfect song. So, if you looked at your little flyer this morning, it has a title, a talk title. And I don't remember what that talk title is. Would somebody tell me? Welcome to Flight 101. And so when you came in, you got a flyer and you got a boarding pass. If you didn't get your boarding pass, they're by the front doors and there's some by the back doors. You did flight to higher consciousness. And your assigned seat is what? To be. Or not to be. How many of you have flown on an airplane? Almost unanimous. However, I did see there were a few people that didn't raise a hand. How many of you have flown on a small plane? Oh my gosh, look at this. How many of you flown on a plane that seats less than 4 people? Look at this. See? How many of you are pilots? Well, there's I see 3 hands. Gerald, Don, and I. And we have our pilot's license. And when we lived in Alaska, we owned a plane. And we got to fly to some fishing spots that you can only get there by plane. And the fishing is good. Before we would go on a trip, we would sit down knowing where we were going to go and figure out our flight plan. You know, figuring out where we're going to go, how we're going to get there, how much fuel it was going to take. And, you know, particularly in Alaska, that's important because you can fly out to places where there is no fuel. And so you have to know, do you need to have a full tank? And when you'd look at the map to see where you were going, you'd look to see if there's some alternate place to land. You always wanted to have reserve. You wanted to have enough fuel to get where you were going, enough margin. We've talked about margin. You wanted to have enough energy. You would have enough supplies. In Alaska, some of the supplies that you have to have is a mosquito net and a gun if you want to fly out in the bush. And when we would get to the airport, we would pre-flight do a check of our plane. We would walk around the plane and we would look at every surface. We would, in fact, because I didn't want to miss anything, I would touch all of the control surfaces on the plane. You know, you'd wiggle things. You would put a little cup under the fuel, or a place to get fuel, and then you'd look at that fuel to make sure it didn't have any water in it. You didn't want to get in that plane and have it fall down. And when you got in the plane and you turned things, you'd check and you'd make sure that everything was working, that your radio was working, that your flaps and your rudder were all in working order. And then it would be time for takeoff. And we would taxi up to the whole short line. And then when it was our turn to take off, we would get up there to where we're supposed to be to take off. And then we'd push the throttle all the way forward and let the airplane begin to roll down the runway. You know, it takes a lot of faith to get into a metal tube with some wings on it. Sometimes now I think they're plastic tubes, and hurtle down the runway and trust that that plane is going to fly. So do you know what makes the airplane fly?
Airfoil.
What'd you say, Stoney?
Airfoil. The airspeed different on top of the wings as opposed to the bottom of the wing.
That's exactly it.
Sucks it up.
Air doesn't lift it up because the curvature of the wing, when the air goes over it, it's going at a different speed than the air going under the wing, and the plane is lifted up. It's the negative pressure. It's not the positive pressure up. It's the negative pressure pulling it up. And that's important. It's important to know that, and it's important to be able to trust that. This morning when you came in, you got your boarding pass. And when you leave this morning, I have something else for you. And the truth is, you can walk out of here this morning and throw that boarding pass away and never think of this lesson again. Or you can, in this moment, right now, here this morning, 11:15, make a choice about what 2014 is going to be. Will 2014 be just like 2013 with a few unforeseen circumstances thrown in? Or will from this moment forward, will it be a flight to higher consciousness? I don't know about you, but I want 2014 to be better than 2013. And there was nothing wrong with my 2013. But I'm always looking for more ways to experience joy, more ways to experience love, more ways to express and experience God. You know, in Prosperity Plus, when Mary Mann Morrissey talks about the vibration, what rates we vibrate at, you know, it could be that at one point I was vibrating at 88.1, and now I've moved up to 99.7. But there still is an opportunity for me to move on up to 101.3. And I get to make the choice. Am I going to stay at 99.7, or am I going to start moving on up? My flight plan is up to me. And if I choose to, I can be in charge of my life and not just float along. If I make a flight plan for a journey to higher consciousness, I'll get there. Did you know that by the end of today, that your heart will have beaten 103,689 times? Plus or minus. Your blood will have traveled, how many miles do you think? A lot? No guesses?
300.
Try 168,000 miles. Wow. You're going to breathe 23,000 times. Most of us will eat 3.5 pounds of food and drink 2.9 pounds of liquid. We are going to move 750 major muscles, and our hair is going to grow 0.01714 inch. And you are going to exercise 7 million brain cells. Whew. No wonder we're tired. And so I'd ask you, which of those activities is the most important? Because for somebody who's had heart trouble, they're going to say, my heart beating. If you have trouble breathing, you're going to say, my breath. And yes, there are some of us who would say that the growth of our hair is important. But the thing that is going to determine the quality of our life is how we exercise our 7 million brain cells. Whether we succeed at reaching our destination of higher consciousness, or we end 2014 just as we began it. It all comes down to our choice about how we exercise this stuff that is up here between our ears. And we're going to do it anyway. Our brain cells are going to work continuously. We get to just make the choice of how they're going to work. So if this time next year you want your life, like me, to be fuller, richer in any way, then you have to make that decision on how you're going to exercise your brain cells. If you want to begin 2015 at a different vibration, then you have to make a plan for your trip, and you have to get started. You know, if you and I pick up the Bible and we read all the things that Jesus said, if we read about Buddha, all the spiritual masters, what you see all these spiritual teachers do is that they do not talk about religion. They all talk about what are the practices that you can do to have a direct experience of God. What practice can you do to find yourself at higher consciousness? Here at Unity of Melbourne, and we say it is a I'm rearranging our balloons because if the air conditioner comes on, it makes a mess. We didn't think about that. And so, Deborah, if you'll just turn the fan on, I don't think we need anything more than just fans. I see fanning yourselves. have to do a little redecorating. Here at Unity of Melbourne, where we say it is a positive path for spiritual living, we teach spirituality. We don't talk religion. And we have 5 principles that we use as a basis for what we talk about. First principle is?
One presence, one power.
There's only one presence, one power. That presence we call God. And our second tenet is, and Maggie, we know you know it.
We're it.
I know, but we know you know it. Let somebody else answer. What is it? A spark of divinity within us. And I'm going to rephrase that and say that you and I are individualized expressions of God. You and I get to play with the third tenet. What is that one?
I create my experiences by the activity of my thinking.
I create my experiences by what?
The activity of my thinking.
The activity of my thinking. Yes, y'all finally figured out there on the card in front of you. In other words, you and I get the opportunity to choose how we're going to use our 7 million brain cells to have power over our life. And what's our fourth? Okay, and I'm going to rephrase that by saying that you and I have union with God. We have a conscious awareness of God through prayer and meditation. We frequently use affirmative prayer and denials. We always use affirmative prayer and denials when we're conscious, when we're exercising our brain cells. Now those are the 4 basic principles, and there's another principle, and it says, you know, if you believe those things, you have to use them. And you have to use them every day. You have to use them when you don't want to use them. You have to use them when it would be easier to say, he did it. It's their fault. People just like you come here to Unity of Melbourne, and they hear this message. They hear the message that God is love, and that they are loved, that they are special, that they are an expression of God, and that makes them feel really good. And they get this part and they think, oh, I have control over my life through the power of my mind. And some of them consciously put that to use in their lives all the time. Some of us put it to conscious use some of the time. And some people sort of flirt with it and play with it. You know, they'll have success with it right at first, and then something comes along, and then they say this stuff doesn't work. And they will leave not understanding why that some of their prayers are answered and some are not. You know, it's a hard lesson to learn. It's hard for you and I to take this truth in. But the truth that we teach is that the answer is that whether our prayers are answered or not is not the will of God. It's not about because God willed it. It's about the quality of our thought and our beliefs. Because we believe that God is good and God's will is only good. And yet when we exercise our mind, like we use our treadmill or our exercise bicycle that become clothes racks, when we fail to use our minds constructively, we get erratic results. When you and I forget to check the oil and the fuel on the plane, when we forget the pre-flight checklist, When we don't do a flight plan, what might likely happen? Get lost, run out of fuel, crash, and in fact, most small airplanes have problems because of pre-flight. They've determined that because pre-flight, all of the pre-flight precautions were not followed and done. When you and I forget God and spiritual principles, we're very likely to get lost, crash, have to make an emergency landing. When you and I don't follow a plan, we lose sight of how spiritually magnificent we are. And you are spiritually magnificent. We forget that at our center and at our circumference is God. But all of the love we've ever wanted is right here, right now. We just simply forget. And that's why we come here on Sunday. We come to remember. To remember who we are and to remind ourselves and to remind each other about the truth. That's what spiritual community is all about. To help us remember that we are trained pilots and that we travel with the best pilot there ever was. I know I've told this story before, but I love the message it teaches. There was this monastery that fell on hard times. And, people quit coming, and the monks quit having new monks until there were only 5 monks left. And they didn't know what to do, and finally one day the person who saw himself as head monk saw that his monastery was dying. And there was a rabbi that came to every year and stayed in a cabin down from the monastery. And so he went down and he talked to the rabbi, and he said, "Can you tell me anything? Can you give me any hint? Can you give me any clue? We don't know what to do." And the rabbi said, "I understand." And they commiserated. And as the monk left, the rabbi said to the abbot, "There's only one thing I can tell you, and that is the Messiah is among you." Ooh, the Messiah is among us. And the old monk went back and he gathered the other 4 monks and he said, "He told me that the Messiah is among us." Well, they started looking around and well, it can't be him. No, not so much. You mean it could be me? I could be the Messiah? Well, maybe he is the Messiah. And what they started doing is treating each other with absolute respect. They started treating them with love, each other with love. And that love and that respect created such an energy that all of a sudden people began to come back and picnic on the monastery grounds. And after a while, there were some young men that came and said, "We'd like to join the monastery." Within a few years, the monastery came back to life and it became a thriving order. Thanks to that rabbi's gift that there is a vibrant center of life and spirituality among them. The Messiah was among them. And in our homes and in our church building here, God does not reassert God's self when God wakes up. God doesn't reassert God's self when God comes to Melbourne to visit. The truth we teach is that God is never absent. God never sleeps. God never leaves us. It's always there. What you and I have to do is have a flight plan to keep us on track. On your boarding pass, there are some affirmations. I am willing to evolve. I am willing to become more myself. I am willing to drop opinions that no longer serve the evolution of my soul. I am willing and available to more good than I have ever experienced, realized, imagined, or manifested before, right here and right now. I want you to take a second and think about that. And I'm going to invite our licensed Unity teachers to be available for you to get your wings. If you are ready to evolve, we have some wings, and they're symbolic of what you're going to do this year. They're symbolic of the flight that you're taking to higher consciousness. But it's a decision you have to make. So I'm going to invite Paulette to maybe go over there by the piano, and Maggie's going to come up here, and Darlene's back in the back, and they have wings. And they would love to pin the wings on you. I'll be here and I'll help pin some wings. I don't know that we can get some music going, but if we could, that would be good. Back there, just anything. Stoney's already responding. Just play what you played for the children. Just play that. We don't need any singing. And if you'd like to come up and make a commitment, we're here to pin wings upon you. I see that this is the best year ever. That the commitment you've made to yourself.